hosting this event, and also to Shruti Vishwanath for this beautiful rendition, for such a gracious start to this evening with a beautiful rendition of Bhakti poetry. I'd like this opportunity to briefly introduce you to Sahapedia. As some of you may already know, Sahapedia has its roots in the Sanskrit word Saha, meaning together, all, to be with, and to be together. Our focus in this case has been on building an open online encyclopedic resource on the arts, cultures, and histories of India collaboratively. That is why Saha, with other organizations and individual experts who work in different fields of knowledge, cultural knowledge. So it is in partnership with many people and institutions that we have developed a digital library of on Indian culture that features thousands of articles, photo essays, interviews, films on subjects ranging from history and philosophy to theatre and music. And while we may categorize diverse cultural expressions as art or architecture or crafts, even cuisine, we have always thought that these manifestations are not only interconnected but also interdependent. As I would imagine, most of you, everyone would know that these are not just interconnected but also are dependent on each other. Performing arts are dependent on texts, or architecture is based on living traditions. So there is a kind of synergy between. So that synergy is what we would have our focus to bring out in Sahapedia. It is precisely in this spirit of collaboration that Sahapedia started the project that we are going to talk about today. We are aware that cultural mapping of Pune will not have been cannot be complete without the support and partnership of innumerable organizations and people, including artists, architects, city residents, institutions, NGOs from Pune. And this project is because of the collaboration of all these people that it is going to be launched in this way that we hope that it is going to be. And many of you, our collaborators and supporters, are here today evening, and that makes it more of a happy occasion for us. Backed by Tata Technologies through funding and with mapping support from Map My India, the cultural mapping of Pune is an effort to document Pune's cultural and natural resources from the past to the present. The information gathered will be available on a free digital map which will trace the diverse cultural heritage of the city by documenting over 1,000 points of interest across more than 20 themes. These include museums, buildings, markets, food, music, dance, rivers, hills, gardens, history, and many other cultural aspects of Pune. From these points of interest are emerging ways for residents and visitors to better engage with the city, for instance, through do it yourself trails that will be featured on the map. The choice of Pune for this cultural mapping was in some ways an obvious one to us because of its distinct cultural history and economic vitality. Pune's urban landscape today is a mix of modern buildings, traditional vadas, colonial structures, and open spaces, and many other similar cultural and artistic assets. Its rich history, however, continues to survive in unique ways. The small alleys, the publication houses and institutions that retain the spirit of the national freedom movement, the old temples, the sabhas that have seen both Naya Sangeet and experimental theatre being performed, the talims, the bars, and the rich memories of its residents, both old and young. While Mumbai may be the commercial capital of Maharashtra, I think it is often said that Pune is its cultural capital. Being a researcher associated with Sanskrit knowledge systems for a few decades now, I myself have great personal regard for the decade long knowledge projects that have happened in Pune, such as the Mahabharata by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute and on the Sanskrit Dictionary by the Deccan College. And through our current project, I have discovered so much more to appreciate about this city, and I think we will continue to do so in the future while this develops and evolves. The extraordinary efforts taken in the fields of environmental activism, for example, and social reformation, and the long history of creative expressions in Pune, whether it be the like experimental theatre that I have talked about, Hindustani music, of film or literature. Finally, we also feel that in Pune, one can feel that culture is not a separate domain from other pursuits, that its centrality and connectedness to social and economic pursuits is publicly acknowledged and often supported by those with the means to do so. In recent decades, rapid development and migration have added more layers to Pune's cultural diversity, and at this juncture, we feel that it is critical to capture the city's unique and vibrant culture and make it accessible to one and all. So we are very happy in this context that you are all able to join with us and launch the beta version of the map in this evening. And a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gopal Krishnan. Without further ado, we will take you through the digital Pune cultural map. I invite Padmapriya Janaki Raman, cultural mapping head, and Rachna Pandey, tech head at Sahapedia, to walk us through the cultural mapping project.
A very good evening, and thanks so much for joining us today evening, being a weekday especially. I'd like to invite upon the biggest supporter, principal supporter for this project, Mr. Warren Harris, the CEO of Tata Technology, to please first come and click the website open for us. You'll have to give. Would you like to share a few words?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. It has been a really great privilege for Tata Technologies to have contributed to this, I think, magnificent achievement. I came to Pune some 15 years ago, and I've seen the city transform during the time that I've been coming here almost monthly, and so it seemed appropriate to us that we would contribute towards this attempt to try and capture some of the foundational elements that have made this city so special. So congratulations to Sahapedia. Thank you for the opportunity of allowing Tata Technologies to contribute and participate. Congratulations to all of the stakeholder groups that have made this event possible. And once again, we look forward to the partnership going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, Raj. So I probably, after all this talking, I want you to take a minute back, close your eyes, and think about all the various cultural elements that you had in your lives, whether it's the food, the literature, the music, the little rituals in your houses, the little gullies where you have probably played a few games, or that tree under which you may have had lunch someday. Imagine all of that information today across many generations and all put up in one major universe. What would it look like? It would be like a massive scale of data. Matter of fact, when we started this project and we started talking about this project to a lot of people, it almost felt like a lost world. And that's a very important point to note, because if we can't see a visual and we don't know where we are, then how do we know where we want to get to? Right? That's probably the principal idea of this project. We all have this huge cultural base of knowledge. There are various kinds of knowledge holders. And we have this information in some space. We can also probably put it together. But there is this universe which is invisible in another way to speak of. Having said that, there is this little point of interconnections between various cultural elements that we have, which become segues into those memories, or those ideas or thoughts, and those knowledge practices. Those layers of information can come from very broad ideas or categories, as one may call, which we call, after many conversations, come to themes, and then filters down to something called a sub-theme, a filter, a layer, a point of interest that finally takes you to where you are, to that idea. So in the context of Pune, if you had to look at, for example, notice boards, there's so much of public culture of notice boards here. One of them is blue plaques, with being the sub-theme, right? And the blue plaques basically celebrate all the accomplishments of some of the most important people in the city by having actually physical plaques in their houses or in important places of residences. And then you probably want to look at who were these accomplishments. I mean, probably you were interested in, you're a literary person and you wanted to look at the men in literature. And then you come to this point of interest called the P.L. Deshpande. But this is not just it, and it's not a media form. You can also go from P.L. Deshpande to Blue Clocks and see probably there are other important people that I'd like to know about who contributed to Pune. It's not just that. It's also about the many very primary and secondary connections that this individual could have with the city, which makes the city what it is today, right? You could have the Pune Okayama Garden, because he was a big fan of Japanese gardens, and we have a name of the garden which is named after him. Or we could have, he was not just a writer, he was also a theatre actor, he was a singer. He also established the amphitheatre, which was actually, in Ferguson College. And so there are so many of these inputs which have made what Pune is, both tangibly and in an intangible way, right? So there is this connection that this point of interest has in many primary and secondary ways within the universe of Pune. There are also various elements which are connected, not who have contributed within the space of Pune, but also interconnected to the larger world. So for example, Pune has been the main place, I mean, one of the most important places for the Swadeshi movement. But so has been the rest of India. What is the connection between the activities which have happened here, which have rendered the independence movement to where it is today, to the free democratic country that we are today? And those interconnections are what we're trying to make. Not just the interconnections that you see within Pune, within a point of interest, but also with the larger universe. But before we get into those details, I want you to not look at these categories or themes and sub-themes as very rigid structures, but look them as segues to get where you are. Look at them as segues of your social realities. You go to a park, you invest a lot, you connect with nature, you enjoy it. At the same time, you probably pass through a river, which is the lifeline of your city, and do not probably engage with it. Not probably because you don't know, not probably because you're not concerned about it, probably because you're not aware of it, or you don't know how to use those energies. I think this is probably very important today, not just today, but for many generations to come. Yeah. It could also be the huge diversity that I have, like just the amount of diversity and plurality I have seen just within the churches, just a place of worship. We have something like the Christ Church, where you have the Marathi Natya Sangeet, and then you have prayers sung in Peter Marthoma Church, which is one of the oldest churches, Marthoma churches in Pune, where you have prayers sung in Malayalam. And then you have the Andrews Hindustani Church, where prayers are sung in the Urdu language. It's fascinating that within a format of worship, you have these diverse practices. And that's important information, not just for today, but also for generations to come. It is with this idea that we probably started cultural mapping, not just cultural mapping, probably Sahapedia, that this archive of knowledge and intersections are extremely important for us to understand and understand the realities of where we are and who we are. But in the form of a map, we actually brought this, as Sudha ma'am had said some time back, that we had brought this through the Fort Kochi project, which was the first time we actually used map as a representation for presenting cultural knowledge, right? And this was done in about 3 months, like that. There was not like extreme, this was again built bottom top in the sense that we did engage with local experts who made this. This covered about 30 communities, 150 points of interest. As you see, this just went from themes, from one layer, which is a theme, which is topmost layer, to the point of interest. We also then did various other projects like the Chhattisgarh project. They're like enormous. Matter of fact, the entire Sahapedia archive, and I'm sure many other archives, including the ones which rest in Buri or BISM and many various others that we have been able to access, like Janvani, the sustainability initiatives, and many more, like Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad, the Marathi Vishwakosh, all of them are, in many ways have this information which can be used and represented geographically. So what is the Pune cultural mapping from 3 years later, where we have come to? It's going to be a free, open access web application covering about 1,500 sites across 12 themes, 36 sub-themes, and will be available in bilingual languages. It's an effort that we go as local as possible as we can. We have, this is just like a quick representation of the themes and sub-themes. Even the food sites are, for example, we look at the sites which have stayed here for 120, 200 years, but also we look not just at physical sites, but also the communities and the kind of communities which have migrated and brought foods along. So we're actually working with journalists and students to go down into homes of people and migrants and understand what are the food culture. Those kind of intangible elements as well. So these are like the range of the themes and sub-themes that we're looking at. I think one important point to say is that those areas in this project, we, as Sudhama rightly said some time back, and we'll keep harping on, is that our biggest effort is that this has to be the ownership of the city. This is not something that we are building for this organization. This is something for the city today, and this is for the city tomorrow. The best way to engage that way is to have all the collaborators and supporters we can to have engage with this kind of a map. Without your support, it's going to be impossible, because then even if we create some 1,500 sites of data bank of information, it's pretty much useless because there will be no ownership of it. And we have had a fascinating journey in the last 7-8 months with all the sub-themes and themes that you're seeing listed, starting from Pushkar sir and Abhijit Dandekar. When we first met about 11 to 12 months back, we actually sat down to work across various points of interest. None of these points of interest have been created by us. Clearly, I'm not from Pune, and we've invested to try and understand the city better. Whether it's Western music, whether it's one of the important things was we had 40 plus collaborators. We've had at least 40 to 50 roundtables so far, and each roundtable takes about 4 hours of our. So a lot of collaborators, whoever is here and has been part of that roundtable experience, will vouch for it, the amount of time and investment it takes. Theme has taken an iteration of at least 20 meetings or 10, 20 meetings. And we have at least, like for natural resources, for instance, we started building the theme, sub-theme point of interest sometime in September, August. And we finally got somewhere, whether we should place flora, fauna inland, whether we should place flora, fauna separately. We finally got to some place in a categorization which was agreeable to everybody. It also set expectations right of saying that we're not going to be exhaustive, but representative. And that was a good way to kind of bring in community to understand this. I'm going to quickly take you through before Rachna takes over and takes you through the beta map. We have information being mapped in various ways. One is the kind of detailed information that Rachna will take you through, which has articles, images, archival material, audio, visual material. Also, we are hoping to do memories. Actually, we wanted to initiate the Neighborhood Memory Project. A lot of, like, for instance, the 1961 floods completely changed the landscape of the Pune city, but we really don't have any record of memories of that available anywhere for research or even for just sharing, right? But we haven't gotten there, but we have gotten with most other things. Most of this content will be available in the Creative Commons format, which means that you can share it for educational and non-profit purposes with attribution. Or if we are acquiring information, for example, we have accessed the archives of Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad, then we will have the license to republish it for non-profit purposes and educational purposes. We also, an important aspect, as I said, is the spatial location. We also found that it's fairly complicated to tell stories about the changing topography of the city, right? And one of the best ways of saying that is through photos and images. And next is maps. There's this amazing piece of work which has been done by Pallavi, I don't know if she's here, but also Wayne Mullen, who actually has mapped the 1800s Pune. And if we can imagine that 1800s Pune cantonment and then placed on the Pune cantonment area and placed in today's map and see the geographical change, that would be a powerful story to say about the changing dimension, geography of Pune city. Also history. It's very difficult to have pages and pages and research of information put together for which is not accessible to many people, but is important for people to know in terms of history. So Rachna will take you through these kind of storytelling experiences that we have put in, which enables a third dimension of time. Articles, visuals come through to narrate a story about a city from various dimensions. It could be the history of transportation. It could be the history of gender contribution. It could be anything, right? We also have, this is something which is very close to me as a practitioner. I'm sure Dancer Shama Bhate will agree with this. As one of the most important things is we really don't know what the cultural assets of our city are. So what we're trying to make in this space is also another category of information, is a directory. which basically means that if I am a museum in Paris, can I come back and say, and I want to commission a visual artist, whom and where do I go to? And important information which you really don't know exists. And it can also be used, it can really help and bolster cultural economy, A. B, it can also be used for cultural policy making. It can also be used for urban policy making. Imagine you had an entire bank of trees diminishing or increasing over a period of 20 years being available in a directory. It can be used for urban policy making as well. We're also looking at trails. Walk leaders in Pune are like a big cheer. India Heritage Walks, one of our flagship projects, we have noticed that we have knowledge holders of all kinds, and the trails have to be, included as a way to narrate and take you through a space. Lastly, metadata of information, which will probably be useful for researchers and other interested parties. From a futuristic point of view, I think there are two important contributions the mapping project does, and we're really thankful to Pune for that and our contributors. One is the ontology. The cultural space really lacks an ontology and subdivision of cultural language. We do not know whether we call, what do we call a particular theme as, what do we call a particular sub-theme as. This probably will give you that. And therefore collect information in a way and make that process and methodology available. It's not probably going to be the most accurate, but it can be put out in open for people to debate and talk about and come up with better ontologies. Most importantly, we're looking at both a content methodology and a mapping toolkit so that both projects within Sahapedia and organizations, cultural organizations, individuals who are interested in mapping can use this as a platform to understand and implement mapping in a better way. And with that, I'm going to leave it to Rachna to walk us through the demo.
Thanks, Padmapriya. Good evening, everyone. We have backup slides, but we're going to attempt a live demo. And we're going to pray to the Murphy gods that they are kind to us today. But we have a backup, so always be prepared. So this is the prototype that we've been working on for the past 2.5 months. The design of this prototype has been in discussion through discussions with content for much longer than that. And we have in this project also launched a new subdomain for Sahapedia, which is map.sahapedia.org. And this subdomain is a place for experimentation, for learning and innovation, for mapping for culture. Right? And we're using this subdomain to collaborate with our mapping partners, MapMyIndia. They're here today. And they've done a large part of the mapping work that we've seen over here is through them and with them. And any learnings that we get from this project are going to be applied throughout Sahapedia, not just on cultural mapping projects, but all documentation, digitization work, because we've recognized through our work with Kochi and Chhattisgarh can do those needs. And also for different projects, not just the Pune project, but other project needs that come out of Sahapedia, we have developed the capability to be able to serve those needs in the future as well. And we're going to continue to build a platform that will serve future needs and not just the immediate needs of the project as well. All right, so as has been mentioned by Padmapriya, what the principal challenge was not just to throw a bunch of information on a map and leave it to people to click through and understand, but to enable discovery and exploration, to enable the identifying hidden connections between pieces of content. And we've done that through themes, sub-themes, collections that span across themes, and different views and ways of storytelling through maps, history, timelines, and trails. And all of these pages are in different stages of doneness. So we have some pages that are that will look good, some pages that are still in a place of innovation, and we're figuring out how they will look and how we will make them connect to the main piece of information, and some which are coming soon, as is highlighted over here. So let me walk you through one sort of discovery through the site. So we have 6 themes out of the 10 themes that we have planned in this prototype. You can click through and see the themes on the menu, or even see all the sites for a particular theme. on the map, thank goodness. And each of these themes have different levels of POIs, and these are also going to continue to evolve over time. They're going to grow more and more dense, and the connections between them are also going to become more numerous. So for sites of interest, we have Savitribai Phule University over here to the west, Gandhi National Memorial Society. We could also go to notice boards, which has blue plaques and blue and digital plaques for people of interest in Pune. And here we have Purushottam Lakshman Deshpande. This is Marathi content that we have. And we have Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Let me jump into a search for a particular POI on the map itself. So I'll search for Vara. I'll select Vishrambagh Vara because that's what I planned to show you. And so you have a little bit of a blurb of Vishrambagh Vara, and if it spikes your interest, you can go into the point of interest page, which gives you a lot more detail about it. You can see that it's a part of the theme, sites of interest, sub-theme, heritage buildings as listed by a local government. Down below on the page, you have longer text on it. And on the left, we have quite an elaborate recommendation engine with primary connections to Vishrambagh Vara, collections that Vishrambagh Vara is a part of, and secondary connections to the same site. And this is, again, only 9 sites. We have much more, but we've abbreviated it just so that it makes it easy to consume. At the bottom you have images as well, and we can support videos and audio for a particular site. At the bottom of the article, we have tags. Now, these tags are generated based on a Sahapedia ontology, and they're generated through a natural language processing technique. So it's replicable and applicable across Sahapedia. So it's not dependent on an individual editor's whims or knowledge, but it's consistently applied across all articles within a project and across projects. And eventually, we haven't done this yet. Eventually, you can actually click on a particular tag and then see all the content related to that tag, not just in the Pune project, but across all of Sahapedia. We'll be doing that shortly, but it's in place. And then below this, we have references as well as citations, and then information about our collaborators. On the left, there is licensing information, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible. And then a contribute button if you wish to engage with this particular piece of a point of interest or wish to engage with the project in general. You have the option to do both. I'm going to go back up again and also point out that we do have language support. The backend of Sahapedia supports all languages. In this particular project, we've limited it to 2. And as we get content in both English and Marathi, you'll be able to read the same point of interest in both languages. As of now, we have some content in English, some content in Marathi, so you can't really toggle between the 2. So now coming back to the discovery, if we look at the collection, so it's quite, you can go through other heritage buildings. You can click on this and go to the sub-theme and see other heritage buildings in Pune or sites of interest within Pune. But if you wanted to go tangentially and see something that would cut across themes, we could look at collections. So Vishrambagh Vara is a part of Varas in Pune, which seems like an obvious collection to be in. But it's also a part of the Deccan College collection, and that's because Vishrambagh Vara was the first home for Deccan College. And it's also a part of academic institutions in Pune because over the course of its history, it's been a site for teaching of different subjects. So we can explore one of these, and we'll go to Deccan College. And this is a collection page. So you can see all the points of interest associated with Deccan College. Let's let the map do its thing. And it spans sites of interest, notice boards, and water. You can see the themes below. So you have, there's a connection between Deccan College and the Mula Mutha River, with the Maratha History Museum, with Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And so we're seeing connections with important people in Pune, river and water, with other heritage sites and museums. So I'll go to Mula Mutha River because I feel like that's an interesting connection. And I think the reason it's a part of the Deccan College collection is because people had to cross the Mula Mutha River to come to Deccan College. And then you can go to water conservation, which is another interesting collection we have. And we are going to see more content come in over here. And here we see points of interest like Jeevat Nadi, which is an NGO that's working on the conservation of Mula Mutha, the Mula Mutha River Festival that's happening around that river, Kathraj Lake, which is another surface water body in Pune. I can keep going, but I'm going to stop here and take a step back. So we've started with a very tangible, Vishram Bagwara, crossed academic institutions in Deccan College, touched upon people of interest from Pune, and then come to environmental initiatives and nature. So with one sort of path, we've covered 4 themes in this sort of the journey of discovery that we want Punekars and people outside Pune to take as they go through this site. I'll speak a little bit about trails. So this is one of those pages that is in progress. We're still figuring out how to commission content, how to connect it with our backend. And this is another very interesting way of telling a story through a map, a story that cuts across themes, but takes you through a space. So this particular cycle trail is a cycle trail through the trees of Pune, and it takes a particular route which starts along the river and then goes further in. So you start here and you can scroll through and see different trees along that route and read a little bit about them. So it's an interactive way, and you could tell any kind of story through this. And this could be supported with audio, with video, with text, with images, or with memories of people, as we're trying to also build that format in. And this could be a very powerful way of telling a story in a very simple manner again. And the other page that we can talk about is the history timeline. Now, history can be very dense and also very vast. So this timeline is again, an interactive way of telling either a very complicated story or a very dense story, but in a manner that allows the user to step in as deep or as deep as or as superficial as they want. And in this way, you can either scroll through starting from 700 BC. So you can see the timeline at the bottom here, and it spans decades. You can start with 700 BC and then step into the 13th century. And as you come further closer to recent history, the points become more and more numerous. You could also explore points not chronologically, but based on your interest, and say, okay, I want to know about Shaniwar Wara, and I'm interested in what happened just before this. And this could again be an interesting space for experimentation of how you want to tell the story of a city and what you want to tell the story of. And with supporting multimedia formats, this could actually be something quite entertaining, not just for a much larger audience that would have otherwise not enjoyed history in the same way. So we're still working on this, both on the technical side as well as content. I'm going to stop here. I think I've really pushed my luck with this demo. But I invite you guys to check out the site on your phones and on your laptops. It is mobile friendly, so please let us know if you have any feedback. I know Panupra is going to talk about that next. Yeah.
So this is a beta map. We just have 50 points of interest here. So the connections are far weaker and further away from each other. But it's an important one to bring out because this will be really helpful for us to get your feedback on this. Also, if you want to collaborate and support in terms of adding on content which fits in these kind of rules and within these frameworks to some extent, please feel free to give your feedback and support UHDP Pune. Or if you want to get my personal ID, if you can spell my big name, so last name. Also, we are very, very concerned and very, very invested in the idea of where this project goes from, right? Which is covering 1,500 sites. That's nothing when it comes to Pune. We want to make this dynamic, this information dynamic. We want it to live longer. We want it to live in the ownership of the city with the right cultural partners. And so it's sometime in May, hopefully in partnership with ISER or Pushkar, or whichever way it goes, we will probably come together, bring all the invested people in this, and see how we can treat, how we can deal with this project and whatever it brings to its city from a more futuristic point of view. So we will come back to you for that as well. We do have plans for the future. Also, there are a lot of cultural partners. Sahapedia is here. If in any which way you want to support each other and you want to connect with people who have come here and you have been unable to do it today, feel free to email me for the same. And yes, we look forward for your feedback and your support and collaboration in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren, Padmapriya, and Rachna. Please feel free to look at the map in more detail on map.sahapedia.org/in Pune. Repeating, map.sahapedia.org/in Pune. We would greatly appreciate it if you could spread the word by sharing the link to the map on your social media handles with the hashtag Pune Cultural Mapping, as well as in your other networks. While cultural mapping is an important tool for documenting the heritage of a city, it is equally important to look critically at the processes of cultural mapping in order to understand it. We will therefore now have a discussion wherein a critical review of cultural mapping will be conducted. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, Pushkar Sohani, Nishu Jain, Srijan Deshpande, and Samrat Fadnis. To tell you a little bit about them, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve is a physicist and the CEO of Samuchit Envirotech. Dr. Karve has invented a number of improved biomass burning cooking devices to reduce smoke in the kitchen and dependence on firewood, the technology for converting agricultural waste into renewable charcoal, and an easy to use Samuchit carbon footprint calculator, and is actively involved in imparting education about sustainable development and climate friendly lifestyles. Pushkar Sohani is an architect, an architectural and cultural historian, and an associate professor of humanities and social sciences at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Pune. He has written about architecture, heritage, language, scripts, numismatics, and material culture. Nishu Jain, currently VP Digital Map Twin at MapMy India, is a passionate map maker and geospatial enthusiast. With her 2 decades plus experience, in her current role, she is managing the map product portfolio, which includes the development of product roadmap with new features, spatial data analytics, optimizing maintenance and quality processes, team structuring, and talent building. Srijan Deshpande is a performer, teacher, and archivist of Hindustani Rag Sangeet with over a decade of musicological and technological experience in the preservation, documentation, and dissemination of Hindustani music using digital technology at important archives of music in India. Srijan has been a professional web developer with several websites to his credit, a sound engineer with a published album to his credit, as well as an archivist with over 7 years of experience. And finally, Samrat Fadnis, the editor of Sakar, is a journalist of more than 25 years and has worked with Sakar, Times of India, and Lokmat. His areas of interest include digitization of content, its impact on society, policies, and democratic values. He has not only traveled extensively as a journalist, but also assisted various journalism and communication institutions in developing curricula that meets contemporary and future expectations of the media industry. The discussion will be moderated by Neha Paliwal. Neha is Director Projects at Sahapedia and apart from other contributions, initiated the cultural mapping project in Sahapedia with Fort Kochi. I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Tanvi. Is this audible? No. No. Is it better? Yes. All right. Tell the difference. Thanks so much, Tanvi. And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to do this panel. And I'm also very glad to see you all on Tuesday evening joining us for this. So taking on from our own experience at cultural mapping, but looking at the process of cultural mapping more critically, cultural mapping as a process has been recognized by UNESCO as a tool to, for both creative economy and all of that. But they say that it's really important that we involve the community in identifying what are the local assets of that community, right? So I'm going to start with asking Pushkar, who is a cultural historian and has been living in Pune for many decades, to talk about how do we involve more and more community. I mean, Padmapriya spoke about the roundtables that we've had and the memory mapping project, how we're thinking of doing that. So could you speak a little bit to what are the ways that one makes the map as representative, as participative as possible?
Sure. So, congratulations on a wonderful product. It made me happy, like when I was happy with whenever I got a set of Lego bricks or a Meccano set, because you have all these interchangeable, movable parts that you can compose to create whatever story you like. And so I think having a toy like this as an adult makes me very happy. And it also doesn't require a lot of physical effort, which makes me even happier. Uh, in any case, I think one of the big strengths of a project like this, of cultural mapping, is that it creates what in history would be called prosopography, which is to study a society through a sum of many small points of data about various individuals. So when you are studying a society of 10,000 people and you don't have complete details of their lives, but you have bits and pieces and fragments and memories and so on, you can create what is called a prosopographical figure, which is to say you combine it, you know, collect it, you coalesce it all together, and you can create the sketch of an individual who lives in a given time and so on. And so a project like this makes a collective aggregate of all the points of data, which otherwise are just points of data, and converts it into knowledge. And this knowledge becomes tangible. And of course, the next step is how to create this knowledge into some kind of cultural wisdom by which we understand ourselves, our past, and where we move to in the future. So, yes, I'm glad that every element of society that is documented, even in fragmentary ways, can contribute to a much larger cultural picture in Pune. And so, one of our colleagues, Madhura Lohokare's work, has been very significant in this, where communities that have never typically found a voice in written annals, in mainstream records, in dominant narratives, still generate small points of data, which, if recorded, collected, and thrown into this bigger mass, can most certainly, add to the richness of a city's and larger communities' history. So
You're talking about Madhura's project with
Yes.
the Dalit communities.
which
And
I think is incorporated within here anyway.
well, some of it is in Varta Falaks, but we hope to do more of that. Thanks, Pushkar. Srijan, if I can take off from that point and come to you a little bit. Your work is with intangible heritage, what is normally known as intangible heritage, which is music and musical practice. Within that, when we had a conversation, you spoke a little bit about how, with these practices, you come to think of them as either universal, having universal standards, or being transcendental, like music is thought of as being transcendental. And your own interest in this comes from translating the universal to the particular. So cultural mapping in a city then becomes a kind of shifting of focus from the universal to the particular. But it's also interesting because when one thinks of mapping, one normally thinks of tangible heritage. It's very easy to say these are the institutions or these are the museums, but how do you say this is the music and this is where the music resides, or this is where you find a practice? And so could you speak a little bit to that question?
Sure. So what I was talking about when we spoke the other day on the phone was this sort of hangover that we seem to have in the community of musicians that I believe, and now that I'm engaged in scholarships and everything, that I believe comes from the nationalistic project that took place by the luminaries, Bhatkhande and Paluskar and all of these people who did such a massive service to this music by trying to depict this music and its culture as a national, to give it a national identity. And that was a response to colonial times, obviously. But we sort of, we don't need to think of it like that anymore. We don't need to give our music status, it already has status, right? But because of this hangover that I think, and that scholars say that this music still has, we tend to think of this music as a monolithic whole. right? And what one misses sometimes in communities that engage with music is particularity, and by which I mean diversity and plurality. So this music is not one music. I mean, Hindustani music, for those who are even a little familiar with it, will know that it's an improvised music, right? And which is why a lot of your socio-cultural, political influences show up. The form of music itself has scope for them to show up, right? To make themselves felt. And thinking of this music as a monolithic whole sort of gets rid of that, right? And what is very tempting to me, to bring physicality that something like this promises into this music is is to is to make it seem more regional, right? So this opens up for me the opportunity to bring locality, to bring local cultures, local attitudes, local temperaments, and to show that these have a relevance, right, in the music, which they very much do, right? In a city like Pune, which is so well known for its musical culture, it's very easy to sit there in a concert hall. And because it's Indian classical music, we often go to this frame of mind that this is transcendental. It's supposed to take you to another world and everything. But you'd be surprised at how much the aromas and flavors of the people who are making the music, the role that they have to play is very important. And an exercise such as this is very tempting to me in that sense, to ground the music a little more, you know. And just on another note, if I can say something else that is very promising to me in terms of technology. I'm also a bit of a geek. Is and because coming from my work at archives in particular, is the fact that I think Rachna said that you've made the backend flexible, and all of the work that you've done with tagging, with natural language processing, and everything. So one big challenge that we face in archives that attempt to document and catalog and classify this music is how to do precisely this, how to deal with metadata, which is a big problem, right? And we're always looking for frameworks and engines that will help us catalog this music. And because we are, I think it's hereditary. We're bad at cataloging. We're bad at dealing with metadata.
I'm not sure. I
Well, at
think
least musicians are. Let's put it like that.
I think ontologies are challenging anyway to create.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
we
are.
found that even in our process.
Absolutely, they are. No, and I think this is again connected because we think that once that the music will take you somewhere, and the rest of it, the corporeality of it is not important. Who sang it, who the accompanists were, where these people lived, where they made their music. This stuff takes a backseat. And where music scholarship is going now, it's easy to see how important this is. So I'll just wrap up quickly with this point that I'd like to make, that the backend that you guys have, you say it is flexible. So if it could be added to, or if it could be made particular to each domain, to each theme that you guys have incorporated. Like I'm going to be selfish here and say that as a musician, I mean, the cultural map of Pune might point to a place where music is being made. And I'd like, if I want to dig even deeper and get into specifics like what rag is being sung and what tal is being sung, I'd like a way for that information to get in there as well.
I'd love for us to provide a way for you to put that information in there so that others can find it. No, that's the idea. I think one of the ideas we have is precisely this. How do we, because this is not a collection of information on our part. There is already so much information that rests with each of you and with all of our collaborators. You were talking, Simran, about the archives of Sakar Group, right? You have all of these archives from 60 odd years, 70 years, perhaps. And how do we make that archive sort of more accessible and for diverse users? Could you speak a little bit about?
Let me first thank Sahapedia for doing what Pune Municipal Corporation or Maharashtra government should have done decades ago.
We hope to partner with it.
Right. But it should have been done by Sakal also, because this is 89-year-old media group, one of the largest group in India, and we have documentation since 1932. It's a digitized form, it's a PDF format, OCR format. This kind of project actually allow us to go through our own document, whether we have 1934 newspaper or not. This can be used for the rest of the world. That is the biggest benefit I am seeing from this project. I would also like to mention that there are few peoples there, like it can be, I don't know the scientific terms of tangible and intangible, but People like Baba Adao, he's turning 90-year-old now, and he started 60 movements, 60. And many of these movements have become law in India for domestic workers to the rag pickers and other people. He has worked enormously, and besides Sakar, you will not find anywhere that is being documented his first speech in 1952 when he first appeared before public and said that okay, rag people should have a respectful life, and we should, as a society, Pune should fight for these rag pickers. Such kind of documentation is available with the Sakar like institution. I don't know many other digital format documentation is available in any other media groups, but Sakar have this kind of documentation, and uh, we would definitely would like to allow people to go through our documents, make a conclusion out of it, and use for this project so that the generations are coming should be able to know what we are. Because as a journalist, what we do is we write. We always say that we write history in a hurry. So we don't just verify the facts, and it's a history in a hurry. And yeah, yeah, but no, the time verifies the fact actually, because we say that the time verifies the fact, and whatever is written in 1964 or 1974 can be verified now, and most probably we could conclude how the society will move forward, because what we wear is very important moving forward. And this project, I think, more than a cultural mapping, it will actually shape the society's future. That is what I believe. And as a Sakar or as a media person, we would definitely like to participate more in these kind of projects.
Well, thank you very much. Because I think we are trying to do that, to draw upon the Sakal archives even for this project. And like you said, sometimes the work of journalists is to record in the moment, and how it becomes relevant for history is only determined later. So the point you made about Baba Rao, and in 1952, one may not have known that that documentation may become relevant 60 years down the line, but now we know that it is relevant. And so the ability for researchers or for residents or for visitors to be able to dig deep into the archive and discover that, but also for our collaborators to curate that, to present it in a certain way, right? Because having a lot of information, just points of data, as Pushkar, you mentioned, is not enough. But how do you pull them together to tell a tale? Thanks, Simran. To come to you, Priyadarshini, in your work on natural heritage, or the environment, or sustainability, a lot of work, right? You also teach big history. You've been our collaborator for a while now, and you've been involved in the discussions on how does one classify these things? How does one also draw the connect between culture and nature? In a lot of our conversations, we tend to think of these as separate. And what determines us as, is it cultural, is it natural, whatever it is. But also, so how do we, in the Pune Cultural Mapping Project, how have we thought about bringing in the fauna, flora, land, hills, rivers, all of those things? Could you speak a little bit about mapping natural heritage?
I'm actually quite excited today that this is finally going out to the public. It's interesting that I came in contact with Serpedia just as I was myself grappling with some of these thoughts. Since 2016, we were doing a project on urban, trying to understand urban sustainability issues in Pune context. And we use the lens of Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is where for the first time I came across this idea of natural heritage in the context of a city. Typically, people who are in the environmental movement don't really look at these things from a heritage perspective. And that brings in an entirely different outlook, which is very, very important in all the fights that we have for preserving environmental hotspots in Pune. For example, if you have an area with very good biodiversity, then one can also suggest that, okay, we will demarcate one part of it as a park where that biodiversity will get conserved and the rest of the area can be made open for buildings. But if you look at it from a heritage perspective, then there is a very strong argument for protecting that entire area in its natural form.
So that angle starts coming in only when you look at it from a heritage point of view. Around the same time, I actually started teaching this big history course, which in itself is a very unique experiment in the world, that a scientist and a historian together, we teach to undergraduate students history of the universe, where the history starts from the Big Bang, from the creation of the universe. And that made me realize that we as humans at this point in time haven't just inherited things that have been created by people who came before us, but everything that has happened on this planet from its inception is our heritage and is responsible for what we are doing and the challenges that we are facing right now. So, from that perspective, also, I started thinking that one has to look at the ecosystem, and particularly in the Pune context, I was also interacting with organizations like Jeevit Nadi, for example. I started seeing that what Pune is as a city is also, I mean, there is a big contribution of its geographical location, its flora, fauna, its rivers, its hills, as much contribution from these factors as from people who have lived and died here. So all of this together has to be considered as the heritage of Pune city. That is when Padma Priya met me, and then it was a eureka moment for me that this is the uh, implementation of what my thoughts are. That how can we then present all of this together as a heritage to the generations to come. So from that perspective, I have been right from the beginning. I have been enamored with the whole idea, and I have been urging people in the environmental movement to connect with this project. Some data has started coming in, but I think it's the first time that mapping of natural heritage is being attempted. So we have also been grappling with how to classify things, where will they go. But I think it has started to come together now.
Okay, thanks so much. Just before I come to you, Nishu, I'm going to throw this out. Actually, you talked about a eureka moment, and this project has been full of eureka moments for us as well. And frankly, just to sort of clarify, this panel is as much about throwing open questions, like thoughts for us to think through, because this is happening in the middle of the, what we've thought of as the project timeline first. The idea is as much to generate questions at this point as to try to attempt answering any of them. So I would welcome you to think about those questions as we come to our last speaker, and then we will come to the Q&A part of this panel. So Nishu, you can maybe take this mic. Yeah. Priyadarshini just spoke about how do we show this? And you're from Map My India, and you've been partnering with us on this project precisely on this question of how do we show this on a digital map. And Map My India has been working longer on mapping than Google Maps, which is what otherwise all of us associate with as mapping, digital mapping. So could you talk a little bit about the journey of Map My India, but also in this context of how do you bring in cultural information? Because often we'll have commercial or economic or those kinds of things are easier to map, but how do you map cultural information on digital maps? So
sure. So first of all, good evening to everyone, and thanks for having me here. So I've been involved in the maps and location technology industry for over 2 decades now. And starting back in 1995, I would like to give you a little context of our history. So in 1995, our founders shifted their base from US to India with a dream of building the map for this country. And thus started this humongous and impossible drive of building every nook and corner of the country. And at that time where we had little connectivity, very less information, and no awareness about the maps. In fact, I used to come across people when I used to tell them that I work in GIS, they would question me what GIS is, what maps are about. From there, but at that time, they had a vision that in 10 years and 15 years of time, every business will use location and map in some form or other. And the fact that we are talking about history, culture, lifestyle, food, music, and we are connecting it to maps is an evidence of their vision and the conviction they had that time. So nowadays it is very easy to look, find locations and visit unknown territories. You can track people. You can literally share your location. So it has become very easy. But I sometimes wonder, did we reach the full potential of the maps? Okay, did we? And my answer would be no. There is a lot more that we can do with maps, because I strongly believe map is not just a representation of location. It's not just a simple drawing of line, point, and polygons on a digital screen or a paper. It is way more immersive, informative, and interactive in nature. And once you attach a dimension of time to the map, it literally have the possibility of telling so many stories. And that's what we are in MapMyIndia trying to do. We are in fact working on building a 4D digital map twin, wherein we are trying to build a very, very hyper-local live map experience in 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional spaces in space and time. And since map has been the core of MapMyIndia, so we could very well, easily connect and relate to what Sahapedia was trying to do in Pune culture mapping. And that was a natural pathway for us to, participate in this project. And I really want to thank Sahapedia team for making it part of this journey. And so in a way, I would say that digital map is a very, very powerful and interactive interface for bringing people, places, and things together. Because when you say tangible and intangible, you can relate the location with a lot of stories. You can relate it with the timelines, you can relate it to the trails. So that way it has the power to tell stories in any form, and it have the power of representing it the way you want to see it. So, and as far as the technology is concerned, we have enough tools available to kind of exploit this infinite pool of information. But there is a bigger question of how do we get the information? Because like we are here, 150 people almost, and every one of has some or the other knowledge. How do we bring this together? And that's where I really like the concept that Sahapedia is trying to do in the form of culture mapping, bringing. And one thing which Rachna pointed out is the flexibility of the platform. Because you need a platform which is not only easy for any user to get information for, you also need a platform where the people who wants to collaborate feels easy and feels convenient to collaborate to the platform, because every one of us is not technologist. We comes from different walks of life. So that's where culture mapping I see as a very good tool to bring people together, to collaborate, and to collaborate information, disseminate it, and retrieve it in the fashion the way we want it. Thank you.
In many ways, I feel this whole project is an upgradation of a 19th century project called the District Gazetteers, which always become the first go-to when you want to research anything historic about a city. And this is the new gazetteer in many ways. Just like you said, MapMyIndia was an impossible project that starts in a corner, and you wanted to cover the whole of the subcontinent, which is exactly what happened in the early 19th century with the Great Trigonometric Survey, where they start off at the peninsular tip, and over a few decades, with chains, they managed to map the whole of India. And so, now we've moved to a 21st century version of what was done laboriously in the 19th century. Not that this is any less laborious, but I really hope this in many ways replaces, enhances, and substitutes for the gazetteers.
And draws upon also. We're hoping to draw upon the gazetteer also as an archive to do the work.
Just a couple of points. So what you just said about 4D mapping and about a very hyperlocal live maps. So that sort of makes me think about, because when I was going through the Sahapedia website and the InPune website, cultural mapping is an effort to document heritage. But heritage is also a constantly changing live thing, right? And so what that brought to mind was Indian classical music or music of any sort in Pune as a destination for music. The first thing that pops up into most people's minds, especially people who don't live in Pune, is the Savai Gandharva Mahotsav, right? And now you have that massive 15,000 audience strong festival, and now you have other festivals that crop up in competition because they want to be the other Savai Gandharva, stuff like that. But as opposed to that, you have a constantly evolving and a constantly active network of smaller concert spaces, smaller performance. I mean, Shamadai Bhatti is here today. Her class is a hub, of musical activity, and there are various hubs like this spread out across the city. Now, there is this trend among the people with the big money, right, to sponsor the next big Savai Gandharvas. If you visit Savai Gandharva Mahotsav, you can see the names of all the sponsors, and those guys are probably looking out for the next Savai Gandharva and everything. But I think it would be a much better idea to direct that money, not only the money, the energy and the effort, towards supporting the hyperlocal, the much smaller organizations and individuals who are working around and for and with this music across the city. And if a cultural map is able to point us to these networks, that's a big service. And that's a big service in terms of also thinking about policy, about arts policy. So that would be a big contribution.
Agreed. I mean, I think this is precisely where we are also coming from in this, is that how do you make this visible? Because becoming visible is the first step towards, in some ways, getting support. What Padmapriya also mentioned about, giving a fillip to the creative economy of the city. How do you provide incentive for people to pursue these kinds of things? And only if they see incentive does that help, right? And so, in some ways, we're trying to do precisely that, Rajan. And coming back to how do you make this happen and how do you make it dynamic? So this is my other question to all our panelists today, is that we will launch, we keep saying in September or October, the actual final version of this map. But what does it mean to be a final version of the map? And for it to remain dynamic and relevant, and who keeps updating that information, I would like ideas here and going forward in May. And, as this project continues, we need to think about this. But today, if any of you have ideas on how do we continue to keep this mapping relevant rather than mapping, because it remains a process. So would anyone like to? Yes.
So as far as the environmental aspect of it is concerned, I believe that it will happen. There is a very practical reason for keeping this up to date, especially I'm talking about the environmental heritage part. All over the country, we are seeing environmental movements coming in clashes with development priorities, and small pockets of ecosystems are getting lost. Some of these battles are being lost in courts. And one reason for that is nobody has ever notified these areas as according to their significance, or as ecological hotspots, or as natural heritage sites. So somewhere, let's say the river in Pune is mapped by experts and it is being called as a natural heritage. That creates a precedence which helps strengthen the case for protecting and rejuvenating the river as a heritage for the city. So there is a vested interest for the environmental groups to ensure that the data remains up to date. There are many researchers, many people who are working in this field who can keep this up to date. But then the interactivity has to be there, where the updation can happen, but in a curated fashion. So some structure will have to be created, I guess, where people who are providing the basic information will become stakeholders and take the responsibility of also taking this process forward, of keeping the information updated, and sort of a mutually agreed processes are set in place to ensure that good quality, authentic and apolitical updates keep on coming.
So I'll talk about it in the context of maps. So see, historically, building a map was a very specialized activity, right? It would be a handful of people who will collect information and process it and present it in the form of map. But in last 10 years, a lot of crowdsourcing has started happening. And when it started, company like even MapMyIndia, we had a fear that people will start adding a lot of digital junk, okay, a lot of junk onto the information. There comes the processes, there comes the power of structures. So what is happening today, a normal map representing places itself is thriving on a lot of information. It's not just a little bit of, a handful of map specialists who are contributing to it. Almost everybody who is using the map or consuming the map is contributing back to the information. And through the process of moderation and curation, the companies like MapMyIndia, Sahapedia, we have the responsibility of keeping the information intact and do proper sanity checks. So going forward, that is one piece, wherein allowing for crowdsource information and allowing for all mediums to be able to contribute back to the maps. Then the second piece is how do you keep the engagement going, because if you take examples of new age social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, what makes people stick to these platforms? Somewhere they connect to it, they relate to it, they are able to express themselves through it. So if culture mapping as a platform is an expression for a lot of people who have not been able to say things or express their work, the work they have been doing for many, many years. So we need to find these connections, this relatedness in order for them to continue to collaborate, plus keeping provisions for normal people also to collaborate into the process. Like I will also be having a lot of information about one or two places which are of interest to me, though I'm not a historian or I'm not really literate in this sense. But so that way, keeping it open, but yes, at the same time, keeping a provision for moderation is very important to keep it going.
I would like to add one thing only. Uh, we must go to the students and see below 30 population more for updation. Like we were discussing about Savai Gandharva. There is no single article about the authentic history of Savai Gandharva except Savai Gandharva's website. At Sakal, we do have first Savai Gandharva to the last December Savai Gandharva in digital text format, but we never required it to reproduce for as a single article. If anybody might be interested, like him, okay, might be interested to document that kind of thing. But if we allow more and more below 30 people to contribute here, uh, as a fact checker, as a writer, and then the senior people can actually work as a fact checker, whether the information is authentic or not. We at Sakal, we are doing when my colleague Sheetal is here, she is the youngest editor in Sakal. At below 30, a woman becoming editor is, it's very difficult in a newspaper like organization where you are too gray. You have to have gray hairs to become an editor. But yeah, then we adopted a process called curation. Okay, we do have a lot of history, we do have a lot of text content, but we don't know how to curate that content. That is the new say, I can't say science, but the new system we are adopting at Sakar, and same can be adopted for the Sahapedia to develop better Pune. Because if anybody wants to have authentic information about the contemporary Pune with respect to history, and I cannot go back to the gazetteer because it was last reproduced in 1994. Since then, it is not updated. So I don't have that kind of content. But at Sahapedia, I can have that content, like uh, my colleague said, that it's a immersive technology, and that is the technology that will actually help us to get more and more contributors, because the generation, we call it millennials, they are not ready to absorb heavy text content. Instead of that, it should be an immersive content, and exactly we have that kind of content in the Sahapedia map. So uh, these below 30 population will help us to grow, and we have to reach them through colleges, through social media platforms, through other media channels that will help us.
Thank you. I think, yes, I think we'll all agree with you that younger people have to be involved in the writing and the, updating of things, along with reviewing and structures for vetting and moderating and reviewing the content that comes online. But I would also ask you, Samra, to support us in this and other mainstream media, professionals here to support us in this, because I think one of the failures sometimes of online. We have so many great archives that are already online, but people don't know that they are online. So unless you get the word out that this resource exists, it's very difficult. And so we would also look for collaborations on that front. Srishan, do you have something?
Yes, I do. So there's this thing about curation that you said, I think is critical, and I keep saying this. Like you said, there are a lot of archives, a lot of material is online. The case of music in particular is a peculiar one because we have our own archive, the Saptak, various archives that have a great deal of music. And we keep sitting there behind our desk and wondering, where is everyone? Why aren't people coming to listen to all the great music that we have? And it's a strange case because the reason is YouTube. Okay, honestly, people who follow Hindustani music will know that everything. I mean, I have been working in archives for over a decade, right? And every second, every other day, there'll be recordings of the great masters, not even obscure musicians, Fayaz Khan, all these great people that will pop up on YouTube that I didn't know existed, right? So all the material is there, but then what is the problem? The problem is curation. There is so much material, and you don't know where to start. You don't know what to listen to. You don't know what to listen for, right? So the need of the day is to curate, to present perspectives, and to take up on crowdsourcing. The great thing about crowdsourcing is that I think we live in an age where having a single authoritative perspective is obsolete, right? It makes a lot more sense to have multiple perspectives, and those perspectives are there for whatever they're worth, right? They may be useful to some people, they may not be useful to others. But the point of a crowdsourced map like this is that it offers multiple perspectives, it offers you choice, and it offers you places to start, right? And it offers you opportunities to curate what you think is important, right? And yeah, so I mean, so curation, and yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about was this thing about the new generation not being able to deal with heavy text, right? And that is another thing that we grapple with also. The other thing, apart from text, is listening to a 3-hour mehfil is another thing that most people find hard to grapple with. So then how do you consume music? Because we live in an overwhelmingly visual culture. So it's a very important question to think about, that how do you make visual forms of art that are not inherently visual, bring visuality back to them. And because this is a visual interactive medium, it opens up possibilities. And I just want to say that when we use the word maps here in this context, we talk about geospatial maps, all right? But you can also think of maps in other ways. You map aesthetic preferences, you map choices, you map how musical processes function. So if we could use the idea of mapping and abstract it from the geospatial, it opens up possibilities. And I hope this technology can sort of take us there in some way.
And I think the notion actually of cultural mapping comes from beyond just mapping spatially. So it started off with the process of inventorying or listing even things, and not necessarily placing them in a location, in specific locations. Okay, so I think we've gone on a little longer, and the evening is progressing a little later than we had planned. So I'm going to ask you all to hold on to your questions, because I'm sure there are some. Ask them after this evening is over, or better yet, perhaps let them percolate. And then when we have the next meeting, we will bring up all of these. Padmapri has also given you our contact details, so please get in touch with us. But our panelists are here even after the end of the formal part of this evening for another half an hour. So please address your questions to us then. And Tanvi, now I'll ask you to continue with the evening's program. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists for that invigorating discussion on cultural mapping as a significant tool for documenting urban heritage. It is an honor to have Mr. S. Ramadurai with us today. Mr. Ramadurai, the president of Sahapedia, is a well-recognized global leader and technocrat who has participated in the Indian IT journey from a mere idea in the 1960s to a mature industry today. He retired as CEO and MD of Tata Consultancy Services in 2009 and was awarded the Padma Bhushan for his contribution to the IT sector. Mr. Ramadurai has since served as the advisor to the Prime Minister of India in the National Council on Skill Development, Government of India, and as chairperson of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, among other positions. I would now like to request Mr. Ramadurai to kindly share a few words.
Good evening to all of you. I think what we witnessed and heard in the last hour and a half is absolutely fascinating, mind-boggling, and what the citizens should get engaged with in whatever form and manner they choose to. I think as the president of Sapedia, I had been aware of this project, and once I was at the Delhi airport after finishing the board meeting of Sapedia, and like every flight in winter, I think gets delayed. So who do I find in the Vistara lounge? Padma Priya. And she grilled me for almost 2 hours with regard to what should we be doing, what are your ideas. And so I gave her enough ideas. I don't know if they're good or bad, but at least I engaged with her. And that's when I got to know a little more about the project. And the next phase was, how do you get the funding for this? So that was a bigger task. And I must sincerely thank Tata Technologies for pitching in. Even though I'm the chairman of Tata Technologies, I recuse myself so that they don't blame me saying that corporate governance requirements are being compromised. I think too often culture is thought of as either an elite pursuit when thinking of the patronage of classical traditions, or as a nice one but unnecessary when we think of art as an extracurricular activity in schools. Both of these frameworks elite the true value of creative and cultural pursuits in our lives. To the extent that creative acts rely on previous cultural expressions of art, language, practice, all our creative acts are cultural. So if we value creativity of any kind, we must all give due attention to our cultural context to do so equitably and in an inclusive manner. I think this is most critical. Equitable and inclusive manner. We must encourage more conscious and considered interventions in the form of partnership which this project is trying to do, and practices and the cultural sector. The Directory of Pune's cultural and natural assets that we are talking about today is one such conscious project, and we need similar mapping across many places in the country, and that's what we will aim for going into the future. At a pan-India level, some key programs launched by the Government of India in the last few years have encouraged the creation of an innovation-conducive environment to stimulate creativity across sectors. Some of these include, we keep hearing, Digital India, Creative India, Innovative India, and Smart City programs. Under the Digital India program, several key initiatives have been undertaken by the Ministry of Culture, including the creation of the National Mission on Cultural Mapping and Roadmap, and the National Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, HRIDAY as they call it, as part of the larger project of modernization of cultural infrastructures. It is interesting to me as a person who has spent many years in the technology sector to see how to make these initiatives and digital technology itself more responsive to and representative of our cultural context. So, for instance, we can easily see roads, restaurants, petrol pumps, and even institutions of culture such as museums on digital maps when we search, but how do we search for the art or the music or the trees in any given geography? In other words, while digital maps right now serve political and commercial interests very well, how do we better get them to serve our cultural interests and concerns? It is in this context, it's important to note that it's not only our interests that drive our technologies, but our technological interfaces also drive our interests. So it's possible to imagine that a map that shows us more of the cultural diversity around us sensitize us to this diversity, and perhaps we discover and appreciate more about the creative and cultural acts that constantly surrounds us. Thoughtful and localized policies and projects that take the diversity of cultural resources into account help in tackling unique challenges faced by communities, including social marginalization, geographic isolation, and infrastructure limitations. These are real. In such a context, a project like the Cultural Mapping of Pune fuels growth in social, cultural, and human development by harnessing dynamic interactions between creativity, culture, economics, and technology. The organization and people of Pune, many of whom have collaborated on these projects, I must thank them, have already been doing so much of work over the last many decades, and Cultural Mapping Project is a contemporary addition to this effort. It's one way to bring cultural resources and digital technologies in the conversation and to bring both to bear on improving the quality of life of all those who live in Pune. To take this further, I hope we can learn from the experience here in Pune and, in fact, extend such projects to other cities in India. With government schemes such as smart cities and Hriday in place, it's even more crucial at this point that we highlight the role of culture, knowledge, and creativity in conversations on urban planning and development. While all of us here this evening may agree that culture is not just an extra feel-good factor, but it is inextricably linked with equitable economic and social development of all communities, it's critical that this is more widely recognized. In conclusion, I would like to request all of you present here today to bring all sections of society, civic organization, resident welfare associations, the corporate sector, the government bodies to a common understanding, and then under a collaborative umbrella. Please also request them to pitch in with money, material, ideas, collaborations, and whatever archives they may have. That without valuing and promoting our arts, our environment, our past knowledge, and our future creative pursuits in a sustainable manner, the pursuit of development will be both incomplete and ineffective. Thank you so much and for giving me the opportunity to be here today with all of you. Like somebody said, March 3rd is a very important day in all of our history of Tatas. It marks the Founders' Day. And having been a part of this institution for 48 years, I cherish Tata's interest even in the place we are hosting this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramadurai. To conclude our program, I asked Mr. Vaibhav Chauhan, Sahapedia's Operations and Resources Director, to offer the vote of thanks.
Good evening. I, on behalf of Sahapedia and the entire Pune Cultural Mapping team, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the speakers and panelists for sharing with us your words and opinions today. Thank you, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, Pushkar Sohoni, Nishu Jain, Samrat Fadnis, and Sujan Deshpande. I must thank our project partner, Tata Technologies, for their gracious support and faith in this experiment, Mr. Ramadurai, Mr. Warren Harris, Mr. J.K. Gupta, and Mr. Praveen Kadle provided invaluable support. Operationally, Mr. Habu and Mr. Pradhan smoothened our path in every way. Thanks are also due to our mapping partner MapMy India and Piana IT Solutions for their support on developing the beta version of the map. A heartfelt thank also to Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute for sharing this lovely venue with us and for the perfect logistic and technical support they have provided us. The project would not be possible without our key collaborator, IISER Pune and Pushkar Sohoni, Samuchit Envirmo Tech and Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Dr. Satya Lakshmi from National Institute of Naturopathy and team at Janwani. The spirit of collaboration is central to this project. Although we at Sahapedia initiated the project, without the partnership and support of innumerable organizations and people, this project would not have been possible. I'm so glad that many of you are here. Our collaborators and supporters are here this evening, and we hope that we have more of you with us in this journey. An event like this cannot happen overnight. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues. I would like to thank the entire Pune Cultural Mapping team for their involvement and hard work for this event. Thank you, Mugdha, Kshitija, Tanvi, Padmaja, Sonia, Divya, Jui, Sanika, Rutuja, Shweta, Aman, Swapnil, Bhavna, and Kalyani. And finally, thank you to all of you for being with us this evening. It has been a great pleasure. Let us carry on this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vaibhav, and thank you to everyone present for your participation in today's event. I hope you enjoyed the program, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. We hope to continue our engagement as the project proceeds towards launching the map in October 2020. I request you now to join us in the courtyard where we arranged tea and coffee. We hope to continue our discussion and hear from you there. Thank you.